Hi, good afternoon. Today I would like to talk about a German explorer and a scientist who was given permission to carry out exploration in the Spanish colonies of South America. His name is Alexander von Humboldt, who lived between 1759 and 18 1769 and 1859. For exploring the Spanish colonies of South America, he had taken assistance of a French person, who was a physicist and a botanist named Bonpland. Both Alexander and Bonpland had started off from a city called Caracas in the country Venezuela at the north of South America to the Amazon rainforest. They reached the Amazon rainforest and they were mesmerized with the beauty of the landscape, the different kinds of birds with different types of plumages they had, and the different colors of fishes, and many more. It was not only about the beauty of the region, it was also about dangerous creatures that they had to deal with. Creatures like snakes, the kind of snakes that would wrap itself around an animal and squeeze it to death, called a boa constrictor snake. They also had to deal with roaring jaguars, the hungry ones. It not only had to do with these large creatures, but even small creatures like insects and mosquitoes would trouble them. There would be strange kinds of insects that would be scurrying on the ground to different directions. These insects not only consume the blood of the visitors but also their food. The two visitors, Alexander and Bonpland, at one time had to depend on consuming ants and the waters of one of the largest rivers of South America, Orinoco, because of this infestation of the insects near their region. And not only insects, there were creatures hovering in the air, the mosquitoes, whose bites would swell the hands of Alexander to the extent that he would find it hard to hold a pen. He would, to escape this fate from the mosquitoes, Alexander would sometimes stand underneath waterfalls, and in others he had to write his diaries in huts filled with choking smoke. These were some of the difficulties that the visitors had faced in the Amazon rainforest. At one point of time, they also sailed in a boat on one of the largest rivers of South America, Orinoco. The boat was a narrow one, a light one, and had pointed ends. It was propelled using paddles. This kind of boat is called a canoe. It was not only the two visitors who were on the boat, there were also guides, the indigenous people, who gave them directions. Alexander and Bonpland had started from Venezuela on on March 1800, and now they were sailing through the river Orinoco on April 1800. They had to face a storm. The region is a tropical region, hence it was a tropical storm. The clouds were nearing towards the boat, and Alexander was feeling uneasy with these clouds. He also observed that near the banks of the river there were large crocodiles that were lazing out near the shallow waters of the banks. The next moment, there would be a heavy downpour that would obstruct his sight that he viewed related to the crocodiles. Because of this downpour, the bottom of the boat was getting filled and the water level was steadily increasing. Alexander was thinking if he could swim to the shore, but at the same time, he also looked back onto his equipment, his scientific instruments and supplies, without which it was difficult for him to continue his scientific studies. He was in doubt. He looked at his assistant Bonpland. Bonpland was removing water out of the boat using a container. After a few moments, Alexander also heard splashes in water, and it was the indigenous guides who were jumping out of the boat and swimming to the shore. There came a point that there were only two people in the boat, Bonpland and Alexander himself. They knew that without the expertise of the guides, they would find it difficult to survive in the jungle that they were about to go to, even if they had prevented themselves from drowning in the river or from the large jaws of the crocodiles. The chances of them surviving in the jungle would have been very slim without the guides. Thinking of this grim state of affairs, Bonpland and Alexander started discussing what to do. Alexander suggested Bonpland that he would take Bonpland on his back, or rather, Bonpland suggested Alexander that his assistant of Alexander, had suggested Alexander that to to stay on his to climb on his back, and Bonpland would swim to the shore. But even before any action was taken based on this plan, the downpour, the heavy downpour, would subside as quickly as it burst forth in the first place. And what followed was a silent breeze that helped the canoe to reach the shore. At the shore, they once again met their indigenous guides. On July 1800, both Bonpland and Alexander returned back from the Amazon rainforest, and with them they carried 12,000 specimens, and these specimens were traveling on the back of a line of 14 mules. A mule is a hybrid of a horse and a donkey. After the end of this exploration in Amazon rainforest, both Bonpland and Alexander wanted to explore more in South America, and this time they chose the countries Cuba and Ecuador. Let me elaborate on what happened in Ecuador. Ecuador is a country which was at the westernmost corner of the South American continent, and it was in the north of the continent. In Ecuador passed one through Ecuador, one of the longest ranges in the world passes through, that is the Andes Mountains. And many of these mountains were volcanic mountains, and the tallest of them in Ecuador was called the Mount Chimborazo. Alexander was fascinated with volcanoes, and hence he had naturally climbed the Mount Chimborazo but did not reach its peak. He climbed to a height of 5,880 meters. And nevertheless, Alexander did not stop there. He had another opportunity to climb another volcanic mountain in the same country, Ecuador, this time in the capital of the country, Quito. The name of the mountain was Pichincha, and he, he, he started to climb this mountain with the help of two guides. Bonpland was not with him. At the middle of the climb, or while the climbing took place, Alexander started feeling dizzy, breathless, and a sense of confusion. These were the symptoms of mountain sickness, and this was quite mild, and it was caused due to the lack of oxygen. Alexander was the first person to find out the fact that lack of oxygen causes mountain sickness. The extreme cases of mountain sickness causes a person to get headaches and become unconscious and also get nosebleeds. It was a time when mountaineers would not carry oxygen tanks with them. It was 1800, and thus the mountaineers were at a risk of facing mountain sickness. And despite such a danger, Alexander and his guides wanted to attempt climbing the mountain the second time. They were at the base of the mountain, Pichincha, and the two guides were looking despondent as they looked through the walls, the rocky walls of the volcanic mountains. Alexander himself was reminded of a mountain that he had climbed in an island in the Atlantic Ocean. The name of the island was Tenerife. He had reached the top of a narrow, long hill by crawling to the top with his hands and legs. Nevertheless, the three people, the two guides and Alexander, had attempted climbing the mountain the second time. The mountain was, the cone of the mountain was covered with snow, and it was solid snow, but there was a place at which the snow was loose, and one of the guides, named Aldas, had fallen into a deep crack due to this loose snow, what one would call as a deep crevasse. He had yelled for help. He had called out saying that there was nothing under his feet. He had fallen into the deep crevasse, but luckily for him, there was a ridge, a snow capped ridge. A ridge is once again, I'm telling you, it's a long, narrow, elevated hill, or an elevated region. Aldas had landed on this ridge, snow capped or snow covered ridge, and when he yelled for help, Humboldt and the other guide had reached him and pulled him out. What happened right then stunned all three people. Both the guides refused to climb further to the top of the mountain. It was only Humboldt who wanted to carry on the ascent. When Humboldt carried on his ascent and did it comfortably to a certain distance, the guide Aldas had observed him and also followed suit. They were walking on steep regions and narrow regions, and gradually, as they persevered, they reached broad and flat regions. There were also signs that they were reaching towards the top of the mountain. The ground beneath them had become hot. They could also get the foul smell of sulfur prickling their nostrils. The ice was also melting at certain regions. Now Alexander Humboldt was walking on the remaining patches of ice that were on the mountain, that were near the top of the mountain, as they thought. As he walked, suddenly there loomed out a rock from the mist of the mountain. In between the ice on which he stood, or the snow on which he stood, and the base of the rock, there was a long, narrow opening from where raised flames, red hot flames. Alexander immediately understood that it was it was an ice bridge on which Alexander was standing on, and it was a fragile one too. Moreover, if he had walked a few steps forward, there was a risk that he could fall into the a long, narrow crack. I would call it a fissure. And therefore, having realized the heavy risk and danger to his life, he had jumped to the to a region which was a rock, a narrow rock, and a horizontal narrow rock attached to the ice bridge or the region surrounding it. Uh, this is called a ledge. Alexander had jumped onto this ledge and also ensured that the guide behind him, Aldas, would be pulled back to a safe zone. Both Alexander and Aldas were now on the ledge, crouched, and they were gazing towards the deep fissure. It was, as I told you, was sizzling with hot flames, and they gazed at the magma of the crater on which they are on. A crater is a ball-shaped depression at the top of a mountain, and the ice bridge on which Alexander stood on in the first place, from where he observed the deep feature for the first time, was spanning through this crater. And once both Alexander and Aldas had reached a safe zone and were crouching or on a ledge and were crouching and gazing at the deep fissure and observing the magma inside, their fear slow turned into elation, jubilation, for this, as they had a sense of pride of what they have achieved right then. They had not only reached the top of the mountain, but had also got an opportunity to observe the magma and the hot flames rising from within the crater. Then it was time to return back. Before that, Alexander had measured the pressure of the atmosphere at their region and concluded that they were at a height of 4,880 meters. After that, he had also ensured and made it a point to dry his boots using the heat of the volcanic cone, and then both of them returned back to the base of the mountain. Hopefully, with this story, you are able to understand the difficulties and the troubles scientific explorers of this type had to face when they carried out their exploration to pick up specimen and also make observations. Thank you.